Okay, so here's the second half of the story about theft anyway. Um, as I said in the previous part of the video, in the previous installment, I guess you could say, we got this job in Kingston. We were clearing out a property there. Now, the way it worked is, and sometimes it does work this way, sometimes we would have to take everything off the property, and then it would be up to us to sort through it and to get rid of any garbage, anything that wasn't a saleable item or whatever, and to dispose of it. And then, of course, we'd sell the stuff that was good and saleable. Um, Other times with these jobs, we could pick and choose. And we could just go through the stuff and take whatever we wanted and leave the rest for the property owner to deal with. Now, as it happens, this was the second type of job. We didn't have to take everything, we could pick and choose. And it was kind of an estate auction. Basically, the family was trying to liquidate the property. That's what was going on. The loved ones were trying to liquidate the property to settle an estate. And inside the house, they had all these glass cases with NASCAR memorabilia, model NASCARs, and so on in them. And out in the yard, there was a car. There was an older car. I can't remember what type of car now it was, but it was like a mid 70s type of a. It might have been a Chrysler or something. I don't know now, but it was kind of souped up. Like you could tell it had been turned into a race car. It was out there. Now we hadn't bought that. It was not part of the deal. But there was also a lot of stuff on the ground: car parts, hubcaps, um, all sorts of stuff. Anyway, at the back of the property, there was like 6 sheds, and these sheds were crammed full of stuff. They were crammed full of car parts and tools and antiques, collectibles, and also just junk, just complete junk. Um, Now, my one of my specialties when I did this job, and one of the things that made me good at this job, is I have some knowledge of antiques, and I'm also really good at knowing what will sell. I can go through the crap, and I can find the needle in the haystack. You know, I can find the shiny quarter in the manure pile. Basically, I'm good at that, and so I was often included in these jobs because I had that ability. And my boss trusted me to be able to sort through stuff and to make sure that only the stuff that we could sell and make a profit off of went on to the cube van, and the rest was left behind. That was really a big part of my job. Oh, pardon me, I'm sorry. I'm coughing here. The air quality in here isn't great. Anyway, here's the thing. We get to this property. Another man who I was working with drove me to the job because he was working there too. We get to the property. My boss was in the house. He comes out of the house and he says, "Get the money out of the sheds." Now, what that means is go through the sheds, find the valuable items, put them on the cube van, leave the rest. And also, I knew that I was going to have to go through everything in the yard, everything that was on the ground and anything that we could sell. Hubcaps, and hubcaps have value to them and stuff. Any of that stuff I was to pick up and I was to put into the cube van as well so we could sell it. Now, I'm good at that. I'm terrible at selling. I'm the guy that knows what will sell, but I'm not the guy who can sell it. That's basically it. I'm a background man, you could say. But I'm not the guy who's going to be able to sell the thing. I'm just the guy who's good at knowing what will sell. Anyway, what has value and what doesn't. Anyway, before we left, though, when we were getting our stuff into the cube van, because I knew there were a bunch of hubcaps, so I took some garbage cans, empty garbage cans, and I put them into the cube van. I did this to deal with all the hubcaps and stuff, I was just going to put them into the garbage cans because it's the easiest way. And anyway, I was working with this guy who was not very bright, but thought he was the smartest guy in the room, and figured he knew my job better than I did, and we used to lock horns quite a bit, me and this fella. And he threw my garbage cans off the back of the cube van, told me I didn't need them. And we got into a fight over that. Anyway, we got arguing back and forth, and my boss come along and told me I didn't need them, that he was right and I was wrong, and to put them back. So then when I got there, I had all these hubcaps to deal with, and all I had was some cardboard boxes and a few recycling bins and, Rubbermaid totes and things to put them in, which wasn't really sufficient. And I remember I was quite frustrated by that when I was picking up that stuff. But anyway, my boss, when I got there, the first thing he told me is get the money out of the sheds. So, of course, I start going for the sheds, sorting things out, and I start pulling any antiques or other things like that that I know we can sell out of the sheds and loading them into the cube van. Well, I think I was on the 5th shed. I was nearly done that part of the job. I was either the 4th or 5th shed I was on. And I pulled a beautiful wood and glass display case that would go on the top of a store counter like 100 years ago with the curved glass. And it would be something that was used for watches or pens in a jewelry store, or possibly for chocolate bars in a general store or a little grocery store or whatever, that would just sit on top of a counter, and you'd put stock in it, and the people could look through the curved glass window, and they could just point and pick whatever it is they wanted out of there, and the clerk behind the counter would take it out of there for them. Anyway, beautiful antique piece, worth a lot of money. So of course, naturally, I took it out of there, and I'm carrying it to the cube van, and this man steps in front of me. I didn't know who he was. It turns out he was the property owner. He was the part of the family or whatever that was dealing with this estate. He steps in front of me. He said, "What do you think you're doing?" Very confrontational. And I said, "I'm taking this to the cube van, and, why do you ask, No idea who he was. And he said, no, you're not. He said, what you're doing is you're stealing. He said, you're in here robbing us. And, of course, I was taken aback. I had no idea what he was talking about. And anyway, he started to yell at me, and he called me some pretty bad names. And he made some threats against me and stuff like that, And I'm standing there dumbfounded. I had no idea what was going on. And then my boss, he comes out of the house because he hears the commotion. And he stands there and watches while this guy dresses me down, calls me a thief, accuses me of robbing him and his family and all the rest of it. Orders me to remove everything I've taken from those sheds from our cube van and put it back where I found it, And so I'm dumbfounded. I keep looking over at my boss as if to say, well, come on, tell this guy that I'm not a thief. But that didn't happen. He just stood there and watched, and then he went back in the house. And that man stood there, and he watched me unload that cube van of all that stuff and put it back. Just stood there with his arms folded across his chest and an ugly look on his face and watched me do it. It turns out what had happened was the stuff in the sheds didn't belong to our boss. He had bought the contents of the house, and he had bought the stuff that was on the ground in the yard. But the old race car he hadn't bought, and we didn't touch that. To be fair, we didn't do anything with that. And he also hadn't bought the contents of the sheds. The contents of the sheds have been sold to somebody else. So basically, we were taking somebody else's property. I didn't know that. I hadn't, he just told me get the money out of the sheds, which is what I did. But I had no idea that that I was basically stealing from somebody. I didn't know. Now, he knew. He knew because he knew what he had bought and what he hadn't bought. I wasn't privy to that information. And so when he said, get the money out of the sheds, I naturally assumed that he owned the contents of the sheds too. And normally when we did those kinds of jobs, it was a deal where the entire property was ours, basically. Anything that was on the property was ours unless certain things were specified. There might be some articles in the house, or there might be some items in the house or whatever. What they do then generally is they put those items in a separate room, or they'd put tape on them. And a piece of tape on an item meant that it wasn't to be taken, that it wasn't part of the deal, basically. So if somebody had a beautiful old antique cabinet they didn't want us to take because they intended to keep it, they just put a piece of masking tape on it, and then we knew that that was not ours. That wasn't part of the deal. Well, in this case, there was no indication that the contents of the sheds weren't part of the deal. My boss knew it, but I didn't. And so it was a perfectly natural thing for me when he said, get the money out of the sheds. I didn't see anything wrong with it. I didn't realize that I was actually stealing from somebody by doing that. Of course, I felt pretty awful about it. On the way back from this job, I'm riding with my friend that I was working with. He was a really good guy. He didn't last there very long. In fact, he left the job that day. And I'm mad. I'm really mad. And I told him, I said, I'm going to tear a strip off him. He came out and he stood there and he watched while that guy accused me of being a thief, and he said nothing. And I'm going to let him have it. When we get back to the shop, I said, I'm going to let him have it. Because I was mad, and I do have a temper. As you could tell from some of my previous videos and stories I've told, I have a bad temper. And I was outraged that my boss had put me in that position, I mean, I'm mad now. You can probably tell I'm getting mad now talking about it years later. Anyway, he talked me down. He said, well, you need the job. If you do that, you're going to lose the job, and you need the job, so you might really want to think twice before you do that. And he was right. I did need the job, so I cooled down anyway, and I didn't go after my boss like I was going to. But here's the thing. I heard him, when we got back to the shop, he was talking on his cell phone to his daughter. And I overheard him say that he saw something really disturbing that day, and he didn't think he was going to continue to work at that job. And after that, I never saw him again, so I'm guessing it was the situation that I got into that upset him so much, and he quit. And I think he was in a better position than I was to do that, so anyway, he was right. He was wise with what he said, and he was also wise enough to see a potentially bad situation. If my boss would throw me under the bus, then why wouldn't he throw him under the bus? Why wouldn't he have him doing something dishonest or crooked without him even knowing about it, and maybe get him into a lot of trouble that he didn't deserve to be in? So if he could afford to quit, he was right to quit. And I think that's what happened anyway, although I'm not 100% certain. I just know that I never saw the guy again. So anyway, he was a good guy. He was a hard worker, and he was a good guy. He was one of the better people we had working there. And of course, we lost him. So, these people who do crooked things, they shoot themselves in the foot all the time. Anyway, like I say, it did happen. I could tell lots of other stories too about crooked things that went on, but that's just one that stands out in my mind anyway, because it happened to me in a direct way. And it really indicated to me that I couldn't trust my boss, that my boss didn't have my back, and that he'd intentionally put me in a situation that I would not put myself into, and that really bothered me anyway. I'm sure he knew that if he had told me that I would be stealing, take the stuff out of the sheds, but it isn't really our stuff, I'd have told him to go, you know what, You know, I just want him to go F himself, basically. I wouldn't have done it. But, and he knew that, and so of course he didn't tell me. And I had no reason to think there was anything unusual. It was no different from what I could see. From my perspective, it was no different than any other job we'd done. On a side note, there's a funny story connected with that house. When we went in there, all the glass cabinets that contained the NASCAR stuff had been smashed. Somebody had gone in there and just smashed them. It turns out what had happened was somebody down the street had hired a criminal to break into their house and rob them and do damage in order that they could collect insurance. But the criminal they hired got confused and went to the wrong address and broke into that house and smashed all those cabinets and stole a bunch of stuff out of the house. And so it was an insurance fraud thing that had, I guess you could say, gone wrong, although really it was wrong to start with. But the crook got the wrong address, broke into the wrong house anyway, and robbed and vandalized the wrong house is what it boils down to. He was supposed to rob and vandalize a house down the street so that the owner of the house could put in a big insurance claim. Anyway, that's what happened there. Like I say, it's a pretty crooked world we live in. That's all. Very crooked world. But that's kind of a comical story anyway. That's almost like something you'd see in an old Keystone Cop movie or something, or an old gangster movie. Where some criminal's hired to do a job, and he's so stupid he ends up not doing the job, but not doing the job he was hired to do, you know, like he ends up killing somebody, but not the guy he was supposed to kill, or he ends up stealing the truck, but not the right truck, or, you know, breaking into the house, but not the right house, or whatever, you know, that's what happened anyway. Yeah, dishonest people aren't always the brightest, that's all. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll talk to you later, I guess. Oh, there's Rocky again. I got to include Rocky. He's turned over now. He's facing the other way, still sleeping. All right. Bye for now.